Vienna, 1906. Just as the first snow-veiled Schönbrunn palace in quiet white, Weylinne Stoughton stepped down from the creaking carriage, her boots crunching on the frozen gravel. Her veil, black and thin, fluttered against the bitter wind. She didn't shiver. Not anymore. Not after being sent away like a scandal. Not after 3 years in Boston with relatives who barely remembered her name. Now she was back. The mocked bride returns, as the Viennese gossips would say by dusk. The palace gates loomed tall behind her. Guards in blue and gold uniforms snapped to attention. She met no one's eyes. 3 years ago, she'd stood at the altar here, beside Prince Leopold of Austria. Or she should have. He'd never arrived. A whisper of treason, a last-minute annulment, and she'd been swept out of court before the candles even burned low at the chapel. No explanation. No dignity. Just a ruined name. She adjusted her gloves and climbed the steps toward the Empress's receiving hall. Her black gown simple, American cut, with no corset drew stares. Let them stare. The invitation had been royal sealed. She was here on order. That meant something. Inside, heat and roses. The air tasted of beeswax and old gossip. Ministers and ladies turned their heads. Her name passed between lips like smoke. Weylinne walked through it all with her chin high. The Empress's secretary met her near the marble hearth. Eyes wide, voice clipped. You were listed to arrive tomorrow. I arrived today, she said. I don't wait anymore. The woman's lips twitched. The Empress will see you shortly. In the meantime, you are to be escorted to your old rooms. The ones they stripped bare? She asked sharp. No longer bare, said a man's voice behind her. Weylinne turned. He wore a soldier's uniform, a captain's rank. His coat was buttoned despite the heat, his boots shining like his medals. His face was new to her, but something about the way he stood tense, precise, made her pause. I was assigned to escort you, he said, voice low. Captain Vasper Grant. Imperial Guard. American? She asked. My father. My mother was Viennese. He looked her in the eye, steady. I volunteered. Why? His jaw tightened. Because they laughed when they said your name. She blinked. He held out his arm. After a sharp breath, she took it. They walked in silence through the inner halls. The palace hadn't changed, still the same gold cornices, the same velvet runners, the same portrait of Franz Joseph glowering above the staircase. And yet the silence between them was new. Not awkward. Just waiting. I read about you, he said as they climbed. The wedding. The annulment. Everyone did. They said you were difficult. Proud. Too American. I was. She looked ahead. Still am. He gave a single nod. They also said the prince left for diplomatic duty in the Balkans. They made sure I never saw him again. This palace keeps its secrets. She stopped at her old chamber door. The wood had been revarnished. Her initials, carved at the bottom when she was 17, were still there. Vasper pulled a key from his pocket and unlocked it. Inside, the room was warm. A fire burned in the hearth. Her favorite armchair had been reupholstered in pale green silk. Someone had placed a single white rose in a vase beside the bed. She stepped in slowly. Why now? Why was I summoned back? He hesitated. It's not my place to say. But you know. Yes. Will you lie? No. She turned to him. Then tell me. The prince is returning, he said. Tomorrow. From Sarajevo. Her spine went stiff. After 3 years. He's no longer a prince. He renounced his title last year. What is he now? Commander of the Austro-Hungarian Southern Division. She swallowed hard. So the Empress wants to parade him as a war hero. Vasper nodded once. And you as the woman he wronged. Weylinne's voice dropped. And what is your role in all this, Captain Grant? He glanced away. To make sure you don't leave. She laughed once, bitter. So I'm a prisoner again. No, he said quietly, then met her eyes. But they fear you'll do something unseemly. She crossed the room and touched a ribbon on the mantel. And would you stop me? He hesitated. I'd ask you not to. She looked at him, then really looked. His face was tired, as if the war had pressed something heavy into him. But his eyes were clear, honest. And he hadn't once looked away. She Saturday, what's your honor worth, Captain? He stepped inside the room, closing the door behind him. That depends on who's asking. I am. He came closer. Not touching. Not threatening. Just near enough for her to smell leather and snow. Then I'll say this, he said. If what they did to you was done to me, I'd want someone to stand beside me when I came back. I'm here. She didn't answer, but her fingers brushed his sleeve as she reached for her gloves again. The next morning came fast. Trumpets sounded. Horses clattered past the terrace. Weylinne stood in her old blue gown, the one she never wore, hair pinned high. No jewels. Just silence. Vasper stood beside her, his uniform pressed, his posture perfect. Outside, Leopold rode in, clean-shaven, taller, eyes harder. The crowd roared. Weylinne didn't move. He dismounted, strode toward her, and stopped 3 paces away. "Weylinne," he said, voice dry. She said nothing. "I never meant to hurt you." She kept still. "It was orders. From the Emperor. We were to marry for alliance, not affection. Then the alliance collapsed. So did our engagement. You could have told me. I wasn't allowed." She looked away. That night, the palace held a ball, gilded and bright. Vasper stood by the wall, stiff and watching. Weylinne danced once with Leopold. It was hollow. Her heart didn't move. Afterward, she slipped out onto the balcony. The snow had stopped. Stars hung above. Footsteps. "Vasper, no guards now?" she asked. "I told them I'd find you faster." She looked at his boots. "Do you think I'm still foolish for coming back?" "No," he said. "I think you're the bravest woman in Vienna." She turned to him. The cold hit her eyes, but not her spine. "Do you think I still love him?" "I think you used to." "And now?" He didn't answer. Instead, slowly, he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. "They made him write this. 3 years ago. He never sent it. I found it in the archives last week." She took it, brow furrowed. "I wasn't supposed to read it," he said. "But I did. And I couldn't stop thinking about you. About what they did to you. About how wrong it all was." She unfolded the paper. Her fingers trembled. The ink was faded. The words stiff, cold apologies, regrets, excuses. There was no love in it. Only duty. She let it fall. "Thank you," she said, voice raw. He stepped forward. "You deserve better than a ghost." "And you?" she asked. "I'm flesh and blood," he said. "And I'd never leave you at the altar." She looked up at him. His face was close. The stars reflected in his eyes. Weylinne lifted her hand, touched the edge of his collar. "I don't want to be mocked again." "You won't be," he said. And then, without hesitation, he kissed her. No music. No crowd. Just cold lips, steady hands, and a promise forged in silence. Inside, the orchestra swelled. But out here, in the shadows of the palace, something real had started. The snow had melted in uneven patches by the next morning, puddling in the seams of the palace's eastern courtyard. Weylinne stood beneath the colonnade, hands wrapped around a porcelain cup of chicory. The scent rose bitter and earthy. She did not sip. Her gaze was fixed on the training field beyond, where Vasper moved among the junior guardsmen, correcting the angle of a bayonet, adjusting a grip, nodding once before stepping back. His coat was off, sleeves rolled, a smear of coal black on the curve of his thumb. She hadn't expected to feel so still, watching him. Not like this. He noticed her only when the drills ended. He crossed to her without hurry, wiping his hands on a cloth bound to his belt. "You were early," he said, eyes narrowing slightly against the morning glare. "I didn't sleep long." "You never do?" "I used to," she said, "before I learned how light can lie." He didn't ask what she meant. He only nodded toward the garden path behind them. "Walk with me." She didn't answer, but she turned, and he followed. The path wound beneath bare lindens, branches clawing the sky like frozen hands. A gardener had begun pruning fresh cuts bled sap along the trunks. The silence between them felt less like absence now and more like a thread being wound. "You said you read the letter," she said without looking at him. "But you didn't tell me what you felt." "I didn't think I should." "Try." He took a moment. It sounded written by someone who wanted to be forgiven without being known. She stopped walking. "That's what I thought too," she said. He glanced at her sidelong. "Do you want to confront him?" "No." She turned away from the path, stepping into the frost-stiff grass. "I want to outlive him in every room they made me leave." A crow cawed from the rooftop. The wind pressed against her coat. Vasper followed without speaking again until they reached the reflecting pool. Its surface was a thin pane of ice, fractured in the center where a stone had broken through. "I was 10 when my mother brought me here," he said suddenly. "She worked in the linens chamber. I wasn't allowed inside the main halls, but I used to watch the guards from the edge of the kitchens. You always wanted to be one of them? I thought if I learned to stand still long enough, maybe I could belong somewhere." She looked at him, really looked. "You stand still better than anyone I've ever met." He didn't laugh. "I'm not still with you." They were quiet again, but it was a different quiet now. His hands were loose at his sides. Hers were clenched in her sleeves. I heard the Empress is hosting a private dinner tonight, he said. For the returning officers. I wasn't told. I was. Will I be expected? They hope you'll attend. And you? I hope you'll want to. She let out a breath. I don't have anything for an imperial table. He turned to her, voice lower. You wore no jewels the night of the ball, and no one looked away. She stepped back. Don't flatter me. I'm not. I'm remembering. She looked down at her boots, the edge of her hem already soaked. You're not like the rest of them. I never claimed to be. Then why stay? She asked. Why serve a court that silences its own? Because someone has to remember who they tried to erase. Her throat tightened. She didn't answer. That evening, Weylinne did not wear blue. She chose gray silk, high-necked, with sleeves that fell to the wrist like drapes. The only adornment was a brooch, a small carved stag, ivory on iron that had belonged to her grandfather. She pinned it without ceremony. Vasper met her outside the tapestry room, where he'd been posted. He didn't speak at first. He just offered his arm. The dining salon was smaller than the banquet halls. The fire was already lit, casting amber over the long table where officers in dress uniforms sat at attention. No music played. Silver gleamed, untouched. Leopold rose when she entered. He did not smile. The Empress, seated at the center, gestured her forward. Lady Stoughton, she said evenly. You are most welcome. Weylinne inclined her head. Your Majesty. She was seated beside Vasper, across from the prince. The meal passed in measured courses: quail with chestnuts, bitter greens, a custard glazed with burnt sugar. Conversation hovered above politics, clung to weather, drifted through mentions of the train delays in Trieste. Leopold asked after her health. She answered in clipped syllables. Vasper did not speak until the Empress turned to him directly. Captain Grant, you have been assigned recently to Lady Stoughton's security? I volunteered, Your Majesty. And how do you find her? He paused. Resilient. Weylinne turned slightly toward him, surprised. The Empress arched a brow. A word not often used for women at court. Then perhaps it should be. Leopold set down his fork a touch too hard. A steward flinched. After dinner, they were ushered into the adjoining room for brandy. Weylinne remained near the window, her cup untouched. Vasper came to stand beside her. You meant that, she said quietly. I don't say things I don't mean. She glanced toward the Empress, who was deep in conversation with a general. Would you walk with me again tomorrow? Yes. She looked up at him. Even if I asked you to take me somewhere they'd rather I not go? His gaze did not falter. Especially then. Their eyes held. And though no one else in the room seemed to notice, something shifted between them, something clean-edged and quiet, like frost cracking beneath a morning sun. The carriage rolled out of the western gate just past the cathedral bells, its wheels muffled by the damp road. Weylinne sat opposite Vasper, the lapels of his uniform darkened with melted sleet. Neither of them had spoken since departing the palace. She watched the blurred outlines of fields give way to the low black hedgerows of Hyacinth's outer estates. I want to see the archives, she said, her voice low, steady. The royal ones. The originals. Vasper didn't ask why. They'll be closed to anyone without direct sanction. Then you'll get me in. He met her eyes. There will be records of the annulment. But they won't show you what you need. I need to see what they struck out. He didn't answer, but his gloved hand lifted once to rap the carriage's roof. It slowed near the servants' entrance of the Imperial Records office. Inside, the air smelled of varnish and coal ash. A clerk in a gray waistcoat glanced up from a ledger, startled. Vasper held out a folded note sealed with the Empress's own mark lifted from her desk the night before, when Weylinne had lingered at the window, and he had borrowed 5 minutes of unguarded quiet. The clerk hesitated, then unlocked the gate. They descended into the lower chambers, past rows of bound legal decrees and brittle maps. The walls were lined with locked drawers. Vasper's hand hovered briefly before selecting one near the bottom, marked Dissolutions, 1903-1905. He withdrew a single folder and laid it across the reading table. Weylinne opened it. The paper was thicker than she expected, the ink still sharp. There it was, in formal script, by order of His Majesty, the intended union between Lady Weylinne Stoughton and His Imperial Highness Leopold of Austria is hereby dissolved. Cited reason, political expedience. She turned the page. A second document, unsigned, dated 2 days prior. Petition for delay of matrimonial proceedings pending further diplomatic review. She frowned. He tried to stop it. Vasper leaned closer. That's not his handwriting. She flipped to the last page. A note. Red wax seal half torn. No signature. Just, the American is no longer required. She closed the folder. Do you still need to see more? He asked. No, she said. But I'm glad I did. They emerged just before dusk. The streets had begun to glisten, lamps flaring halos in the wet air. Weylinne didn't speak again until they reached the corner of the Weimarplatz, where the butcher carts had been cleared and the windows of the dressmakers' shops were dark. My father sent me here with 3 letters of introduction, she said. One to the Empress's lady-in-waiting, one to the British ambassador, and one to Leopold. He told me to marry well, and quickly. Did you understand why? He'd lost most of his holdings to debt. I was the only asset left unspent. Vasper's jaw shifted, but he said nothing. I used to think that if I was clever enough, graceful enough, I could win them all over. That I'd become someone they couldn't dismiss. You did. No, she said. I only made them afraid to speak too plainly. They reached the palace gates. The guard stepped aside without question. You never told me, she said, slowing. What happened to your mother? She died the year I joined the guard. I'm sorry. She never saw me in uniform. But she'd have noticed the stitching. Weylinne looked up at him. You speak like someone who's been waiting to be seen. So do you. The corridor outside her chambers was dim. A single sconce burned low beside the door. She reached for the handle, then paused. Come inside. He hesitated. Is that wise? I'm not asking as a lady of court. And I'm not answering as a soldier. She stepped aside. Inside, the fire had burned down to coals. She lit a small lamp, the flame catching in the glass shade. Vasper stood near the hearth, hands behind his back. I know what this is becoming, she said. He didn't move. So do I. I don't want it to be a secret. Then let it be a vow. She turned toward him. Of what? That I'll stand beside you. Not as duty, or pity, or penance, but as a man who sees you fully. She crossed the space between them, slowly, deliberately. Her fingers found his collar, tracing the line where fabric met skin. He placed his hand over hers. You've let them write your story long enough. Then help me write the rest. He bent his head, breath warm against her temple. No rush, no hunger, just presence and promise. When they kissed, it was quiet, the kind of quiet that held. Outside, the city kept its pace. But in that room, something shifted, no longer bound by past silence, no longer waiting for permission. Just the slow, certain beginning of something neither of them had to name. The snow did not return, but the wind sharpened, curling through the stone corridors like a blade. Each morning came gray and early, the palace wrapped in a hush that hung between footsteps and closed doors. Weylinne no longer kept to the private wing assigned to her. She walked the long galleries now, alone, eyes lifted toward the faded tapestries that had once hidden her from sight. On the 5th morning after the dinner, she entered the palace chapel just after the sacristan had extinguished the altar candles. She moved to the back pew, unloved hands resting lightly on the carved wood. The air was still warm with incense. She didn't kneel. I thought I might find you here, Vasper said behind her, his voice quieter than usual. She didn't turn. I used to come here when I was still trying to believe in order. He stepped beside her. Now, I believe in consequence. He took the seat beside her without asking. The Empress's steward approached me this morning. Her eyes flicked to his. About us? No, not yet. They still think you'll bend to the court script. They've arranged a reappearance. I assumed they would. It will be at the opera. Your name is on the guest list. She looked forward again. And Leopold? He'll escort you. Publicly. They're calling it a reconciliation. She didn't speak for several breaths. Then, do you think I should refuse? I think you should be seen on your own terms. She folded her hands in her lap. And what would that look like? He considered. You choosing who stands beside you, not being placed beside someone. The silence between them wasn't uncertain. It was bracing. Outside, bells rang from the square. She rose slowly. Then I'll need a gown. I'll speak with my cousin. She's a seamstress near the Naschmarkt. Quiet, discreet. That's not how I want to be seen. He gave a short nod. Then I'll tell her to use crimson. She turned to him, brows lifting slightly. Bold. You weren't made for shadows. She left the chapel without another word. But her steps rang louder now against the stone. 2 days later, she stood in the seamstress's back room, arms lifted as fine pins were tucked into the waist of the gown. Vasper sat near the stove, coat folded on his knees, steam from the teacup in his hands curling against his jaw. "I want the neckline square," Weylinne said, watching herself in the mirror, "and the sleeves fitted to the elbow, then falling loose." The seamstress nodded without comment, her fingers moving quickly. Vasper spoke without looking up. "The Empress's envoy came again this morning." Weylinne met his eyes in the reflection. "What did he want?" "To remind me of my station." She turned from the mirror. "What did you say?" "I reminded him I've already disobeyed worse men for better reasons." She gave a breath that might have been a laugh, but wasn't. "You're not afraid, are you?" "Only of silence." That night, she returned to her rooms to find a parcel on her writing table, an old leather-bound volume of poetry, the kind she'd once kept hidden beneath her mattress. Tucked inside was a note, and signed but penned in Vasper's hand. "For choosing your voice." She read until the lamp burned low. The night of the opera arrived with a fine mist clinging to the colonnades. Her carriage pulled up to the front of the Staatsoper, where torches flared and pearls gleamed across necklines. She stepped down without assistance. A hush fell along the steps. She wore crimson. Leopold waited near the entrance, formal and stiff, medals arranged with mathematical precision. He offered his arm. She looked at it, then passed it. "I will sit beside you," she said, voice cool. "But not because they told me to." He nodded once. "Then let that be enough." They walked through the front arch and into the gilded lobby. Chandeliers glistened above them. Eyes followed their every step. In the imperial box, she sat with her chin high, hands folded in her lap. The overture began. She did not look at Leopold again. It was during the second act, amid a quiet aria, that she turned subtly, eyes sweeping the lower gallery. And there, near the shadows by the stage left promenade, stood Vasper. He was not in uniform. His coat was dark, simple, but his face was unmistakable. He did not try to signal her. He only watched, as if waiting for her to decide. The soprano's voice climbed, then fell into silence. Weylinne rose. The audience turned. Whispers flickered like sparks. She walked out of the box, down the staircase, across the foyer, through the doors. Outside, the mist had thickened. The carriage stood ready, but she did not approach it. Vasper stepped from the shadows. "You didn't need to come." "I wanted to." He removed his gloves, slowly. "Then I'll walk with you." They moved together down the colonnade, past the horses, past the gloved guards and flickering torches. Neither of them spoke. At the end of the square, beneath the statue of Orpheus, she stopped. "Tomorrow, they'll write what they want. They'll say I stormed out, or lost composure, or returned to Boston. I know, but we'll know what I really did." "Yes," he said. "You chose." She looked up at him. "So did you." His hand brushed hers. Not asking, not claiming, just anchoring. They stood like that, quiet beneath the falling mist, no longer hidden, no longer waiting. And the city, for once, held its breath.